The first time Clara saw Miguel smile was in this rundown cafe in Alfama, with cracked tiles and dim bulbs that hummed like dying bees. Outside, Lisbon drowned under a gray, relentless drizzle that washed the city's color into the gutters. She sat by the window, clutching a chipped mug, watching raindrops race down the glass like tiny suicides. He sat across the room, elbows on the table, reading poetry in that hushed way that made it feel illegal. When he looked up and caught her staring, he didn't flinch, just raised an eyebrow, lips twitching with that infuriating, crooked smile. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a dare. And God help her, Clara was tired of saying no to herself. She was a literature teacher who felt her passion had been butchered by curriculum committees and endless staff meetings. The smell of dry erase markers, the hollow eyes of bored students, the constant scraping of chairs on tile, all of it crushed the life from her. Miguel, meanwhile, was the definition of beautiful disaster. Freelance photographer, always broke, perpetually chasing the next fix of meaning behind a lens. He had this battered leather jacket that smelled like cigarettes and rain. There was something about the way he occupied space, unapologetic, reckless, that made her chest ache with longing. They talked the first time like they'd known each other for lifetimes, leaning across the sticky cafe table, ignoring the clinking of spoons and murmurs of tourists. He quoted Neruda without irony, voice low and confessional, while she teased him for being pretentious. He just shrugged, flashing that damn smile again. "So sue me," he said, "I like love poems." Her laughter startled even herself, raw and unguarded. She realized then she hadn't really laughed in years. It was infuriating and liberating all at once. Soon they were inseparable, orbiting each other like doomed planets. Mornings tangled in bedsheets that smelled of sweat and cheap detergent. Nights wandering the labyrinthine alleys of Lisbon, stopping for shots of ginginha in cramped bars. Kissing like they needed to devour each other to survive. She loved that he was a mess, that he didn't pretend. He told her about sleeping in train stations in Granada, about his father's fists, about how he sometimes didn't want to wake up at all. She listened, fingers tracing the scars on his forearm like they were lines of holy text. He made her believe in magic again, even when she knew better. They'd run through the rain just to feel alive, splash each other in puddles like children who didn't know heartbreak. He photographed her constantly, reading on park benches, smoking at her window, crying after fights. He said he was documenting proof she existed. She told herself she didn't mind being vulnerable, that it was love to be seen so completely. But sometimes she'd catch him staring too long, as if memorizing her for when she'd inevitably leave, and the fear in his eyes split her in two. Their love burned too hot. They devoured each other's time, bodies, attention. Friends rolled their eyes and stopped inviting them out because they'd vanish into their own world, language peppered with inside jokes and unfinished sentences only they understood. She loved the chaos of it, the whirlwind. When they were good, it felt like fate itself had engineered them in the same lab. But even then, in the quiet moments after sex, her head on his chest, she could feel the ticking of some terrible clock, like they both knew this couldn't last forever. He hated planning anything, even dinner. Commitment gave him hives. When she asked about the future, he'd make a joke or kiss her until she forgot. But she didn't forget. She couldn't. Bills arrived, whether they were in love or not. Her job grew heavier. She found herself covering for him, lying to landlords, giving him cab fare when his bank balance hit zero. Still, when he smiled at her, all forgiving, all charming, she melted. God damn him for knowing exactly how to crack her defenses. They made promises late at night, drunk on cheap wine and their own delusions. "We'll never be like them," they whispered, meaning their parents, the world, anyone who'd given up. He'd kiss her shoulder and vow to follow her anywhere. She'd promised to believe in him no matter what. Sometimes they cried, holding each other so tightly it hurt. But come morning, the real world intruded. Unpaid rent notices slipped under the door, hangovers like small deaths, the neighbor pounding because they were screaming at 2 a.m. Clara's colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes. She started showing up late to meetings, hair still wet from hurried showers. They whispered that she was losing control, that he was bad for her. She wanted to punch them all. Who the hell were they to judge love? But late at night, she'd look in the mirror and see it too. the way her shoulders slumped, the way her gaze avoided itself. Miguel would notice her retreating and overcompensate with grand gestures. A stolen flower, a Polaroid with "I love you" scrawled on the back, a desperate grin that promised she was still his reason to try. Lisbon became their accomplice and their jailer. They fought in tiny restaurants, their voices echoing off tiled walls. They made up in doorways older than memory, kissing until they were breathless. There was an intensity to it all that felt heroic, cinematic. They liked thinking of themselves as star-crossed, but the drama wasn't sustainable. Every fight left them raw, every reconciliation felt shakier, and yet they couldn't stop. Even when they swore it was over, they'd call each other hours later, sobbing apologies that turned into phone sex, both hating themselves in the aftermath. Miguel never unpacked his trauma. He laughed it off, drank it down, ran from any question that sounded too much like caring. Clara tried to fix him. God, she tried. She read self-help articles, suggested therapy in whispers. He'd scoff, saying he didn't need a shrink, then get drunk and cry in her lap about things he'd never tell anyone else. She stroked his hair while he shook. She hated herself for loving him more in those moments, for wanting to save him so badly it made her sick. He had talent, real talent. His photos were gritty and honest, unflinching. He'd capture old women hanging laundry like Renaissance paintings, street kids playing soccer in alleys that stank of piss and fish. She loved his eye for beauty and ugliness. She believed in him more than he did. She'd hype him to gallery owners, send in his work without asking. He'd thank her with that dangerous smile, then pick a fight the next day about her controlling him. It was a dance they both knew the steps to by heart. Sometimes they'd take the train to the coast, just to escape the city. He'd lean out the window smoking, hair whipping in the wind, looking like freedom incarnate. She'd watch him and wonder what the hell she was doing. But when they hit the beach, they'd strip and run into the freezing Atlantic, laughing and screaming. They'd lie on the sands shivering, tangled like roots, talking about running away for real. Portugal was too small. The world was theirs. Until the train ride back, silent and sober, bills waiting at home like prison guards. Sex was their ceasefire, their worship. Even when they hated each other, they'd still fall into bed. She'd bite his shoulder to shut him up. He'd pull her hair until she gasped. Afterwards, sweaty and spent, they'd lie there tracing patterns on each other's skin, neither willing to say they were sorry. It was raw and messy and vital, but it didn't fix anything. They both knew it, and somehow that made them cling to it harder, like drowning people hugging an anchor. Miguel had a way of making everything feel urgent. Life's short, he'd say, dragging her out of bed at 2 a.m. for a walk along the river. They'd sit on the damp stone steps, watching the bridge lights smear across the water, sharing a joint. He'd tell her things he couldn't tell anyone else, about his mom, about the first time he wanted to die. She'd hold his face in her hands, whispering that he wasn't broken, that she wouldn't let him go. It felt like a pact with the universe. She wrote poems about him she never showed anyone. In the margins of lesson plans, on napkins she stuffed into drawers. Lines about the way he said her name like a prayer, about the crack in his voice when he lied. She hated herself for being so cliché, but she couldn't stop. Love had turned her into every woman she used to mock. A fool with a heart too big, too breakable. And even knowing that didn't help, not when he looked at her like she was salvation itself. They started fighting about stupid shit, who left the window open, whose turn it was to get groceries. But under every petty argument was a deeper wound. She needed stability, he needed freedom. She accused him of being a child. He called her a joyless bureaucrat. The words stung because they were true. They both knew it. And knowing it just made them angrier, more desperate to hurt each other first. Money was always tight. He'd sell gear, he loved to make rent. She'd skip meals to pay the gas bill. They laughed about it sometimes, playing poor bohemian chic. But the stress sat heavy on their chests. She dreamed of a future that didn't involve counting coins. He refused to think past tomorrow. When she tried to budget, he'd roll his eyes. When he suggested stealing train rides to Madrid, she wanted to scream. Friends stopped asking about them. Her best friend called him a train wreck. His cousin called her an anchor. They both bristled at the judgment, but secretly agreed. It was easier to cut people out than admit how toxic it had become. Their world shrank until it was just them. Two people clinging to a sinking raft, convinced letting go would kill them both. And yet, despite everything, there were those smiles. The ones that made her heart squeeze painfully. The way his eyes crinkled, the dimple on one side only. The silent apology, the desperate plea, "Don't give up on me." And she'd think every time, "I can't, I won't, not yet." Even when she knew better, even when she felt the ground cracking beneath them. Because love wasn't supposed to be easy, and she'd promised. Miguel was pacing the tiny apartment at 2 a.m., fingers running through his tangled hair, while Clara sat by the window, pretending to read but not turning a page. The radiator rattled like a dying thing, casting warmth that couldn't touch either of them. She asked him where the money went, and he barked that she didn't trust him. Her eyes flashed, but her voice stayed calm, the kind of calm that could kill you. He slammed his palm against the wall, leaving a smudge of sweat and anger. She didn't flinch, just sighed. Rain hit the glass in fat, ugly drops. It sounded like applause for the tragedy unfolding. Neither of them wanted to be the villain, but someone had to play the part. In those days, Miguel sold his cameras one by one, pawn shop owners shaking their heads at the waste of talent. He'd smile like it was a joke, lean on the counter with red-rimmed eyes, ask for enough to make rent and buy a bottle. Clara worked double shifts at the high school, teaching bored kids about dead poets while she felt herself dying too. She graded papers in bed, red pen dancing across hopeless essays, pretending not to hear when he stumbled in late. The apartment stank of stale beer, unspoken insults, and regret. They stopped buying groceries together. They stopped kissing goodbye. They learned the language of silence, fluent as natives. One night, Clara sat at the kitchen table and listed expenses in her neat teacher's handwriting while Miguel smoked out the window. His face was a blur in the dark, only the ember of his cigarette visible. "We can't keep this up," she whispered, voice cracking. He exhaled a laugh, bitter as bile. "I'm doing my best," he slurred, but they both knew it was a lie. Her pen snapped in her hand. Ink bled like a wound onto the paper. He watched her wipe it away and felt something inside him break, but he didn't know how to fix it. Neither did she. So they sat in the dark and let the city swallow their dreams. They fought over nothing and everything. Who forgot to pay the electricity? Who was more selfish? Who had given up first? Miguel's voice was raw from shouting, Clara's from crying. Sometimes they'd make up for an hour, lying side by side, fingers brushing like they still remembered love. But it never lasted. He would say something cruel without meaning to. She'd say something true that cut too deep. The bed felt like a battlefield. Their apartment shrank around them, a prison they built together. Neighbors heard them and pretended not to. When it went quiet, it was worse. That silence was heavy as earth on a coffin. Miguel started disappearing for days at a time. No explanations, just a muttered, "back later," and the door slamming hard enough to rattle the frame. Clara stopped asking where he went. She was too tired to care or too afraid to hear the answer. She'd sit on the floor of the shower for hours, letting scalding water burn the exhaustion off her skin. At school, she pasted on a smile for her students, told them literature could save them, all the while feeling like the world was drowning her. At night, she fell asleep in clothes she hadn't bothered to change. She didn't dream, or if she did, she didn't remember. He came back once at dawn, shivering, wet from the river or the rain, she never knew which. His eyes were wild, pupils blown, mouth working around apologies that never formed. She handed him a towel without a word. He took it, dropped it, reached for her. She turned away. He cursed, punched the doorframe so hard it splintered. She winced, but didn't look back. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, the city on his clothes. In that moment, she hated him more than she'd ever loved him. But she also wanted to hold him until he stopped shaking. Instead, she went to work early, leaving him alone with the ghosts. Some nights, despite everything, they ended up in the same bed, not making love, but clinging to something that used to feel like it. Miguel would bury his face in her neck, mumble that he was sorry. Clara would lie stiff as stone before her resolve cracked, and she'd wrap her arms around him. They'd fall asleep like that, temporary truce, fragile as glass. In the morning, they'd avoid each other's gaze. Breakfast was silence and cold coffee. The day would break them all over again. And yet, in those stolen moments, they remembered who they used to be. It was the memory that kept them going, even as it killed them. Money went from tight to non-existent. Clara pawned her grandmother's ring. Miguel offered to sell his last lens, the one he'd sworn never to part with. She told him to keep it. He didn't thank her. Instead, he stayed out longer, made excuses that fooled no one. She stopped waiting up. Bills piled on the table like accusations. They argued about whose fault it was until they both lost their voices. Then they just stopped talking, not in forgiveness, but in surrender. The city outside seemed to mock them, neon lights blinking like cruel laughter. They were in love once. Now they were just roommates who hated each other. The final fight wasn't even the worst one, just the last. Clara said he was a coward, that he hid in bottles and lies. Miguel told her she'd killed every dream he had. Her face went slack, tired beyond words. He waited for her to scream back. She didn't. She just turned away, picked up her purse, and walked into the bedroom. He followed, spitting insults that sounded like pleas. She ignored him, packing a small bag with quiet efficiency. When he grabbed her arm, she shook him off with a glare that froze his blood. He fell silent. She zipped the bag shut and didn't look back. She left the key on the table, next to an empty bottle. The apartment was dark, but the hallway was lit like salvation. Her steps echoed. In the elevator, she pressed her fist to her mouth to stop the sobs from waking the building. The doors closed on the life she'd tried to save. Outside, the rain was waiting for her, a cold baptism. She didn't have a plan, just a need to get away. The city was vast, uncaring. She felt tiny and unbearably alive. She would cry all the way to her sisters, but for now, she just walked, head down, trying to forget the weight of the key she no longer carried. Miguel woke up alone, hungover, mouth dry as sand. He called her name before he remembered she was gone. The apartment was silent in a way that made his ears ring. He noticed the missing clothes, the empty space where her shoes had been. His eyes fell on the key, the final insult. He picked it up and hurled it against the wall. It didn't make enough noise to match the rage inside him. He kicked over a chair, smashed a mug. Then he sank to his knees among the wreckage. The quiet was absolute. He realized he couldn't even remember the last time she'd smiled at him. For days, he didn't leave. Bottles littered the floor, flies buzzing in lazy circles. He tried to write her a letter, but the words looked pathetic. He deleted every draft. He smashed his phone when he couldn't stop checking it. The landlord knocked about the rent. Miguel shouted through the door to fuck off. He thought about calling her sister, but knew she'd never let him speak. He slept on the couch because the bed smelled too much like her. In dreams, she told him he could have been better. He woke up shaking, crying, swearing he'd change, but the dawn always stole the resolve. Clara moved in with her sister for a while. It was cramped, but safe. Her sister didn't ask questions she didn't want answers to. Clara cried in the shower, ate little, slept less. She applied for extra hours at work, said she needed the money. Her colleagues whispered that she looked sick. She smiled at them with her cracked lip smile and said she was fine. At night, she scrolled through old messages with Miguel, rereading apologies, jokes, I love yous. She'd wake with the phone still in her hand, face wet with tears she didn't remember shedding. She told herself she hated him. Sometimes she almost believed it. Miguel finally sold everything he couldn't carry. He left the apartment in ruin. The landlord cursed him as he left the key on the floor. He took a bus south without saying goodbye to anyone, ended up in Barcelona first, then further south. He took pictures of strangers, of sunsets on foreign beaches. He sent some to magazines, got paid just enough to keep moving. At night, he sat in cheap hostels, drinking until he didn't remember her face. But it always came back. In the dark, he whispered her name like a prayer or a curse. The sea never answered. The camera never lied. Clara eventually found a small apartment of her own. She bought cheap furniture, didn't bother decorating. It was enough that it was hers. She set rules. No drinking alone, no crying at work, no checking social media for pictures of him. She broke them all. Her friends tried to get her to go out. She said she was busy. She taught her classes like nothing was wrong. But some days she'd stare at her students and see herself, young, hopeful, doomed. She'd go home and read poetry until the words lost meaning. Sometimes she dreamed of him knocking at her door. She always woke before she answered. Miguel tried Morocco next. The light was different there, harsh and pure. He liked it. He photographed markets, deserts, old men smoking by crumbling walls. But the colors reminded him of her eyes when she cried. He sent a postcard to no one, just to write her name. He got drunk with other lost souls, argued about art, kissed people whose names he forgot. He told himself he was free, but every morning there was that empty place beside him. He thought about calling her. He never did. Instead, he poured another drink. The local kids laughed at him when he fell asleep in the street. Clara's sister begged her to move back in. She refused. She wanted to prove something, though she wasn't sure what. She took on too much work, lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. She bought herself flowers sometimes, pretending it wasn't sad. On weekends, she'd walk by the river, coat wrapped tight, hair whipped by the wind. She watched couples and felt hollow. She didn't hate love, she just didn't believe in it anymore. Or she told herself that. At night, she'd stand at her window with the lights off, watching the city glow and wondering if he was somewhere out there, as ruined as she felt. Miguel stopped taking pictures for a while. The camera felt like a lie. He worked odd jobs, washed dishes, carried crates. People asked him where he was from. He shrugged. He let his hair grow out, beard covering the face she used to kiss. He stopped writing in his journal. When someone asked about the scar on his knuckle, he said it was nothing. He didn't tell them it was from punching the wall the day she left. He didn't tell anyone anything. At night, he lay on thin mattresses in hot rooms, counting regrets like rosary beads. Sometimes he still saw her in dreams, mouth open to say goodbye. Clara graded papers until her vision blurred. She forced herself to eat dinner even when it tasted like cardboard. She paid bills on time, always. She said yes to after-school meetings, stayed late to help students who didn't care. It was easier than going home. She deleted his number but knew it by heart. When colleagues asked if she was seeing anyone, she smiled with her teeth and shook her head. At home, she read the same line of Neruda 20 times without understanding it. She missed him so much it felt like organ failure, but she'd made her choice. She couldn't save them both. Miguel took photos again, eventually, not for art, for money, weddings, tourists, stock images. He felt like a fraud every time he clicked the shutter. Sometimes he'd catch a woman laughing, and for a second his chest would ache. He'd lower the camera, swallow it down. He never showed anyone the old photos of Clara. He kept them in a battered envelope, stained with sweat and tears and beer. On bad nights, he'd open it, drunk enough to talk to her. "I'm sorry," he'd say to a frozen smile. The photos never forgave him. He kept them anyway. He couldn't let her go. Not really. Miguel stood on a rooftop in Lisbon, the wind ripping at his coat, camera slung over his shoulder like a confession. The city sprawled below in crooked light, orange and cruel. He had money now, not much but enough, from selling his photos to magazines he didn't respect. He leaned on the railing, watching gulls dive and scream. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he let it ring. He hadn't spoken to anyone who mattered in months. He wondered if Clara would recognize him now. Hair shaggy, eyes haunted, older than his years. He hated himself for still wanting her to. The sun sank, staining the river blood red. Clara sat in a cafe in Porto, a book untouched before her, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. She had grown quieter, leaner, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She'd taken up writing again, nonsense poems scribbled in margins of lesson plans. Her colleagues thought she was better. She wasn't. She had just grown expert at pretending. She told herself she didn't think about him, but some nights she woke gasping, his name in her mouth like a swallowed blade. She turned the ring on her finger, a cheap trinket she'd bought to replace the pawned one. It was a lie she wore like armor. He started traveling north without planning to, just moving. Portugal felt too small, Europe too crowded with memories. He slept on buses, trains, the floor of friends' places who didn't know his real story. He photographed churches, markets, strangers with kind eyes. None of it felt real. Sometimes he saw her hair in a crowd. His heart would stop and then beat so hard it hurt. But it was never her. He told himself that was good, that he wouldn't know what to say if it were. The camera weighed on his shoulder, a burden, a promise, a memory of what he used to want. Clara kept teaching. She moved apartments again, smaller, cheaper, lonelier. She painted the walls pale blue so it felt like the sky. She didn't date. She tried, once or twice, but every touch felt wrong. She laughed at her own awkwardness and went home alone. She wrote emails she didn't send. I hope you're alive. I hope you're miserable. I hope you're better. She deleted them all. Her sister stopped asking about him. Clara appreciated the mercy. She read poetry late at night, underlining lines about survival and loss. She drank tea that went cold. She lived, if you could call it that. He sold a photo series to a big magazine, portraits of old fishermen on the Algarve coast. The money was enough to get him drunk for a month. He didn't. Instead, he bought a new lens, the kind he'd once called overkill. He took it out at dawn and shot the empty streets. Light spilled like grace across cobblestones. He thought about sending one to her. No message, just the photo, but he didn't know her address, or if she'd even want to see. He imagined her looking at it, eyes softening. He shook his head like a dog, clearing the fantasy. He was too old for hope. Clara began volunteering at the library on weekends. She liked the hush, the smell of old pages. Kids would ask for help finding books, and she'd kneel beside them, patient, gentle. She told herself this made her good, redeemed something in her. At night, she'd stand at the window, mug in hand, watching people rush home to lovers, families. She felt like a ghost watching the living. She'd whisper to the glass, "Miguel," just to hear it. She promised herself she wouldn't do that again. The next night she did. She told herself it didn't mean anything, but it did. It always did. Miguel had his first sober birthday in years on a beach in Galicia. He didn't tell anyone. He just sat in the sand, watching waves tear themselves apart. He felt small. That was new. Before, he'd felt angry or numb or righteous. Now he just felt small, and weirdly grateful to know it. He wrote her name in the wet sand, waited for the ocean to erase it. When it did, he felt both empty and free. He slept that night under the stars, no blanket, camera on his chest. He dreamed of her saying his name without hate. He woke with tears drying on his cheeks. Clara's sister called her one evening, voice hushed, urgent. Their mother was sick. Clara packed a bag in 10 minutes, took the first train south. She watched the countryside blur by, reflections of herself in the window. She looked tired, but determined. In her bag were papers to grade, clothes she didn't care about, a paperback of Neruda she always carried. She wondered if he'd even know if she died, if he'd care. She shook the thought away, pressed her forehead to the glass. The train roared on. She felt it in her bones, this relentless forward motion, no time to go back. Miguel heard about her mother from an old mutual friend. He froze. He hadn't heard her name spoken out loud in so long it felt like a resurrection. He asked stupid questions. Is she okay? Is Claire okay? The friend shrugged. She's there now. Miguel hung up without saying goodbye. He paced his tiny rented room like a caged thing. He wanted to go. He had no right. He thought about calling, imagined her voice going cold when she heard him. He didn't sleep that night. He stared at the cracked ceiling and whispered, "I'm sorry." The walls didn't forgive him. Clara held her mother's hand in a sterile hospital room. Machines beeped. Nurses whispered. Her mother's eyes fluttered open and closed. Clara read poetry to her, voice shaking. She remembered being little, her mother braiding her hair, singing off-key. She tried not to cry. Outside, the world felt wrong, too bright, too loud. She didn't think of Miguel. She didn't let herself. But at night, in the guest room, lying on a cot that smelled of antiseptic, she remembered the way he used to hold her when she cried. She punched the pillow until her knuckles hurt. Then she slept. Miguel found himself at a train station. He didn't remember buying the ticket, just needing to go. He sat with his camera bag at his feet, hands trembling. He rehearsed things he'd say. "I'm sorry. I've changed. I know you don't owe me anything." He knew she might not even see him, might refuse, might hate him so much it hurt to look. He boarded anyway. The train rattled through night and dawn, landscapes he didn't care to photograph. He felt like a fool. But he'd been a coward too long. Even cowards deserved one chance to try. Clara's mother improved slowly. Clara stayed an extra week, just to be sure. She cooked meals she barely ate, sat with her mother through soap operas she didn't watch. She smiled when her mother teased her about being too thin. She laughed, and it sounded broken. When she finally packed to go home, her mother squeezed her hand. "You'll be okay," she said. Clara nodded. She wasn't sure it was true. The bus ride back felt like purgatory. She scrolled old photos on her phone, deleted a few, kept others. She slept with her head against the window, dreaming of things she didn't want to remember. Miguel stepped off the train in her city. He didn't know where she lived anymore. He walked for hours, camera banging against his hip. He bought coffee he didn't drink, sat on benches, watched couples argue and laugh. The city felt like an old friend that didn't recognize him. He asked himself if this was insane. He told himself he'd leave if he didn't see her today. But he didn't buy the return ticket. He watched the sun go down in bruised colors. For the first time in years, he didn't take a single picture. Some things you had to see without framing. Clara unlocked her apartment, dumped her bag on the floor, collapsed on the couch. She didn't cry. She didn't feel much at all. She dozed there, clothes rumpled, phone buzzing with worried messages she ignored. At some point she woke, drank water like it was holy, and showered until the hot water ran out. She wrapped herself in a towel and stood at the window, watching rain beat on the glass. She felt tired enough to give up, but she didn't. She dressed slowly, deliberately, made tea, sat at her table, and tried to write a poem but couldn't. She just wrote his name, over and over. Miguel found her building by accident, or fate, or cruelty. He didn't know. He saw her light on through the rain. He froze across the street, heart detonating in his chest. She was there, real, alive. He watched her silhouette move, small, solitary. He realized he didn't deserve to see her like this, unaware, vulnerable. He turned to leave, then he turned back. His feet moved before he decided. He crossed the street, rain soaking him, camera bouncing against his ribs. He climbed the steps slowly, every muscle screaming to run. He raised his fist to knock, dropped it, raised it again, knocked. Inside, Clara froze. The knock was soft but insistent. She felt her heartbeat stutter. No one visited unannounced. She wiped her eyes, though she wasn't crying. She walked to the door slowly, every step an argument with herself. She pressed her palm to the wood. Didn't ask who it was. Part of her already knew. She felt sick. She felt alive. She turned the lock with shaking fingers. The door creaked open. She looked at him, wet, older, eyes hollow but burning. Her mouth open but no words came. She gripped the door like it was the only solid thing in the world. Miguel stared at her, silent. His mouth worked but no sound came. He felt all the things he'd planned to say disintegrate. He wanted to beg, to apologize, to run. Instead, he just looked at her like a man dying of thirst, seeing water for the first time. Rain pooled at his feet. His camera hung heavy. He thought about offering it to her as if it could explain anything. Instead, he just whispered her name, broken, reverent, terrified. Clara. Like a prayer, like a sin, like the only word he remembered. He saw her flinch, saw something break in her eyes. She didn't slam the door, didn't invite him in. They stood like that for a century, breathing each other in. She felt everything she'd buried clawing its way to the surface. Anger, grief, love so raw it hurt to contain. She swallowed hard, voice cracking when she spoke. Why? That was all she could manage. A single word that held years of questions. She hated him for showing up, for making her hope, for looking at her like that. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to hold him. She hated that she wanted anything at all. She felt her knees weaken but stood firm. Miguel blinked hard, tears mixing with rain. I don't know, he rasped. It wasn't enough, it was everything. He shook his head, drops flying. I'm sorry, he added, voice breaking like glass. It sounded pathetic. He felt pathetic. He thought she'd spit at him, tell him to go to hell, he deserved it. Instead, she just stood there, eyes shining, jaw set. He wanted to reach for her, but didn't. He didn't get to touch her, not anymore. He would stand there forever if she asked, just to prove he still could, just to show her he remembered how. Clara exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. She let the door swing wider, just enough. Not an invitation, a possibility. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She didn't forgive. She didn't forget, but she didn't close the door. She stepped back once, giving him space. Her eyes never left his. She saw the man she loved, the man who ruined her, the man she'd never stop missing. She hated it. She needed it. She said his name like an accusation and a benediction. Miguel. And he stepped over the threshold, dripping and ruined, ready to try, ready to fail. But there,